So we're in this series on the life of David. And before we jump in to David's story, where we're at on that today, I want to introduce you to someone named Ike Brown Sr. All right. Now, Ike Brown was a police officer in Jacksonville, Florida for many, many years. And on May 27th, 2002, something happened that altered the course of his life forever. He's up at 4:30 in the morning for some reason, getting ready to go in for his shift at the police station. He's getting his coffee ready, starting to go through his morning routine, and his doorbell rings. And he's like, that's odd. I'm not used to having, visitors at 4:30 in the morning. So he goes and answers his door, and he sees a few people outside. He sees his police chief. He sees his sergeant, another one of his fellow officers. But what strikes him is he sees the police chaplain standing there as well. He knows that something is off. So he asks, he's like, what? He looks directly at the chaplain and he goes, why are you here? Something's wrong. You're not supposed to be here. His chief then informs him that that night, his 21-year-old son, Ike Jr., had been killed. He was over at a friend's house doing what young people do. He was just playing video games with his best friend. Someone charges into the house as a part of an apparent armed robbery and kills both the boys that are there. They had no connection to this shooter. They had no relationship with him at all. It was just as the police officer said, as the DA said, they were just simply in the wrong place at the wrong time. The man who killed them, a man by the name of Takoya Kreiner, was charged with 2 counts of murder. And 3 years to the day after Ike Brown Jr.'s funeral, the trial begins. Ike Brown Sr. had no idea what to expect. He knew he was going to be in the courtroom for this trial. And as he thought about this day, he thought about it for, like I said, for 3 years. And he'd always been the type where if you mess with any of his kids, he was going to mess with you back. If you hurt my kids, I'm going to pay you back for that. He wasn't sure how he would react to seeing Takoya for the very first time. So in the midst of tragedy and loss that struck not just this family, but their community as well, their church family, a lot of people were grieving over this tragedy. Ike Brown Sr. lays eyes on Takoya Kreiner, his son's killer, for the first time in a Jacksonville courtroom. Now I want you to put yourself in Ike Brown's shoes for a second here. How would you respond in this moment? How would you feel inside? What would you be thinking at that moment? This circumstance is an unbelievable tragedy, but there are instances all the time from varying degrees where people do us wrong. And we're faced with a choice in how we respond in those situations. Someone calls you out unfairly in a meeting. A friend who you're supposed to trust breaks your trust and betrays you. Someone makes nasty comments about you online or behind your back. How we respond in these moments, it matters. Just like we've talked about in the first couple weeks of this series, what we do when no one is looking is very important, and it matters. So what are we supposed to do when we're wronged? What do we do when someone does wrong to us? And we're going to see a story from the life of David that's going to help us answer this question today. So we're going to land eventually in 1 Samuel 24. You can go ahead and turn there if you would like to. Before we get to it, though, there's some important context that we need to go through just to set up this story that we have in 1 Samuel 24. So to do that, I'm just going to summarize 1 Samuel 18 through 23. If you're interested in looking at those more in depth, I encourage you to take a look at those each week. If you take a look at each of those chapters, one of those chapters each day, that'll get you to next Sunday. So if you need a Bible reading plan, I got you. There it is. You can learn some more about David and Saul. So where we left off in David's life last week was perhaps his biggest, most famous triumph and victory, where he kills the giant Goliath, right? And after this great victory, King Saul does not let David return to his home. Rather, he keeps him with himself. But in 1 Samuel 18, we see some problems start to come up pretty quickly. David is experiencing great success as he leads Israel's army, and gradually as he keeps going into battle and having success, King Saul gives him more responsibility, more leadership, and the more that King Saul trusts David, David just continues to do better and better because the scriptures say that the favor of the Lord was on him. He begins to be celebrated by everyone, by Saul's servants, by his fellow officers in the military, and frankly, all the people of Israel love David. As David enters town, in fact, the people begin a chant. When they see him, they greet him with a chant. They say, Saul has killed thousands, but David has killed tens of thousands. And they just repeat that over and over and over. Now, upon hearing this, as you might guess, King Saul does not like this chant, all right? He's like, okay, fine, whatever. And he's jealous at David for this success that he's been having. He feels threatened by how beloved David is by the people. And what happens is he's afraid because he knows that David has the favor of the Lord on his side, which is something that Saul does not have. If you remember in the first week of this series in 1 Samuel 15, God says he regretted making Saul king because of his disobedience and because of his sin. He had lost God's favor. So Saul thinks is the only thing left for David to accomplish. He's accomplished so much in his life. The last thing that he's yet to conquer is to become the king. And so Saul keeps a watchful eye, a close eye on David because he's threatened. He feels that his power is threatened. In the next several chapters of 1 Samuel 18 through 23, Saul makes attempt after attempt to kill David. He tries to kill him personally. He enlists the army of Israel to try and kill David. He has schemes that he comes up with to try and capture David. And he's just hunting him down. It seems to be what he's obsessed with. Saul's driven by jealousy, rage, insecurity, fear, paranoia, and this obsession that will not be satisfied until David is gone. Meanwhile, David seems to have a very different set of motivations at work. He finds himself in a much different situation than Saul. David seems to be motivated most by faith. We see this illustrated through a number of psalms that he writes that are attributed to this period in his life while he's on the run from King Saul. I think of Psalm 34:8, where he says, "Taste and see that the Lord is good. Blessed are those who take refuge in him." Or Psalm 52:8 through 9, where David says, "But I am like an olive tree flourishing in the house of God. I trust in God's unfailing love forever and ever. For what you have done, I will always praise you in the presence of your faithful people, and I will hope in your name, for your name is good." David remains faithful by being pure. He makes sure that his men are pure while they're out on mission. David also regularly prays, asking God for guidance and wisdom as he leads and as he's on the run from King Saul. David shows loyalty, not just to God, but even to the king as he's chasing him down relentlessly. David is a fugitive for a substantial amount of time. Many scholars would say it could be anywhere from 3 to 10 years that Saul was hunting him and chasing him down. And so we can imagine that after several years of doing this, that he'd be probably quite tired, quite weary as well, just motivated by surviving every day. So to summarize, Saul, motivated by jealousy and fear and insecurity, is hunting down David, who to this point has shown nothing but faith and loyalty. David has not done anything that we know of to warrant this, which is important. At the end of 1 Samuel 23, Saul and his troops pursue David, and just as they are closing in on him to capture him, he gets word that the Philistines, their real enemy, had begun to raid their land. And so Saul and his troops, they break off from their pursuit of David to deal with these Philistines. David, meanwhile, takes refuge in a place called the En-Gedi, which the En-Gedi is a real place. It's a place in the desert where there are springs and streams of water and hundreds of caves. You can see a picture there. And this was a place that people, as they were traveling, would stop at because of the water supply, because of the shelter that the caves naturally provided for them. So it's a great stopping place if you were traveling or if you were hiding from an entire army that was trying to capture you and kill you. And as you can see, it still exists today. This is actually, it's preserved as a nature reserve in modern day Israel. So it's helpful sometimes when you read the Bible to remember that these are real places that we talk about. They were real back then. They're still real to this day. So as we read this passage, as we read this story, keep this picture in mind to kind of help keep the scene, the set for this story. So that brings us to 1 Samuel 24. We'll start here in verse 1. After Saul returned from pursuing the Philistines, he was told David is in the desert of En-Gedi. So Saul took 3,000 able young men from all Israel and set out to look for David and his men near the crags of the wild goats. He came to the sheep pens along the way. A cave was there, and Saul went in to relieve himself. David and his men were far back in the cave. The men said, "This is the day the Lord spoke of when he said to you, 'I will give your enemy into your hands for you to deal with as you wish.'" Then David crept up unnoticed, cut off a corner of Saul's robe. Saul enlists 3,000 of his youngest, most able-bodied, elite troops to hunt down David. So David and his men are hiding in the innermost parts of this particular cave when Saul enters. Now we have to understand the odds of this situation and how improbable it is. First of all, like I said, there are hundreds of caves in this region. And for whatever reason, Saul picks this particular one to enter into. Also, what makes it improbable is that he's entering into this cave to go to the bathroom, which means that none of his guards, none of his other troops would be in there with him. So he is completely alone, vulnerable, and unaware that David and the couple hundred men that he has with him are hiding in the back of this cave out of his sight. And so David's men recognize that this is a 1 in a million opportunity that's before them. This man has been hunting you down for years, tormenting you, and you finally have a chance to do something about it. This opportunity has been provided by God for you to get even, is the gist of what they're saying. So David makes his move. He sneaks up to Saul, and he cuts off a piece of Saul's robe with his sword. This moment is a culmination of years of Saul hunting David, David fleeing from Saul. It's an opportunity for David to encounter his enemy in person, and it's a chance for David to get even with Saul for years of torment. Now let's see what happens after David cuts off the piece of this robe. Afterward, David was conscience-stricken for having cut off a corner of his robe. He said to his men, "The Lord forbid that I should do such a thing to my master, the Lord's anointed, or lay my hand on him, for he is the anointed of the Lord." With these words, David sharply rebuked his men and did not allow them to attack Saul. And Saul left the cave and went on his way. Then David went out of the cave and said to Saul, "My lord the king." When Saul looked behind him, David bowed down and prostrated himself with his face to the ground. He said to Saul, "Why do you listen when men say, 'David is bent on harming you'? This day you have seen with your own eyes how the Lord delivered you into my hands in the cave. Some urged me to kill you, but I spared you. I said, I will not lay my hand on my Lord because he is the Lord's anointed. See, my father, look at this piece of your robe in my hand. I cut off the corner, but I did not kill you. See that there is nothing in my hand to indicate that I'm guilty of wrongdoing or rebellion." I have not wronged you, but you are hunting me down to take my life. May the Lord judge between you and me, and may the Lord avenge the wrongs you have done to me, but my hand will not touch you. As the old saying goes, from evildoers come evil deeds, so my hand will not touch you. Against whom is the king of Israel come out? Who are you pursuing? A dead dog, a flea? May the Lord be our judge and decide between us. May he consider my cause and uphold it. May he vindicate me by delivering me from your hands. David had experienced being wronged at the hands of Saul, whether directly or indirectly, so many times. From not allowing him to return home, to direct attempts on his life, to schemes to capture him and kill him. And what we see is David's response to this wrong happens in 3 different places, which we're going to unpack with our time today. So David responds to being wronged in his spirit, in his actions, and in his words. These are the 3 things that we're going to unpack. So the first way we see David respond is in his spirit. The way he responds internally is with conviction instead of control. David makes his move. He creeps up. He cuts off the piece of Saul's robe. But something causes him to stop right there and go no further. Verse 5, David was conscience-stricken for having cut off a corner of his robe. He said to his men, the Lord forbid that I should do such a thing to my master, the Lord's anointed, or lay my hand on him, for he is the anointed of the Lord. David had his opportunity to get even, but conviction in his spirit led him to stop. Even his own men were telling him that this was the prime opportunity. This was God's provided opportunity to do something about this. But David also knew that he had been commanded by the Lord to not harm whom he had anointed to be the king of Israel. So instead of seizing control of the situation and taking matters into his own hands, David stops and he pays attention to this conviction that he experiences in his spirit. Now, conviction is a feeling that I doubt many of us enjoy, right? We don't like to be wrong. We don't like to be told we're wrong. We don't like to feel like we're wrong. It's not a great feeling. Conviction is that feeling when your stomach drops right before you do something you know you're not supposed to do, or right after you do something that you know you're not supposed to do. It's that alarm that goes off in your brain before you send a hurtful text to someone. You're like, you like delete it like 10 times and rewrite it. You're like, should I do this? It's that feeling when you're with a group of people that's gossiping about someone else and you make your contribution and immediately you feel like, ooh, I don't think I should have done that. I gotta be honest, I experienced some conviction the other day, all right? This week, for some reason, we had Oreos in our house, which is not something that we have very often. And I'm a guy who likes to have a little sweet treat before I go to bed, all right? So I'm like, I got these double stuffed Oreos in my house. This is awesome. And so the other night, I had a couple, and it was great. I had a couple, glass of milk. So I guess this is a good way to end my day, you know? And it occurred to me after I ate them that no one else in the house was awake. There was no one that could stop me from eating more if I wanted to. And so I went back to the pantry and I was like, all right, I'm gonna get some more Oreos. And I opened the thing and I was like, oh, I really feel like I shouldn't do this. Like this doesn't feel right. And I gotta be honest, I ignored my conviction and I had a few more. And I felt worse afterwards, surprisingly, physically and mentally, in my lack of self-control and gluttony, all right? That was conviction that I ignored. Conviction, while it's not pleasant, serves a great purpose in our formation as followers of Jesus. It's the work of the Holy Spirit reminding us what God has instructed us to do, the commands that he's given us, and helps us remember what we should do. And he gives us warnings when we're about to do something that we shouldn't. In John 14:26, Jesus says that the Holy Spirit will teach us everything and remind us of everything that we have been taught. And when faced with conviction, we have the choice to either lean in and submit to it and stop whatever it is that we're doing, or we can just push through and assume control and just do whatever we want, like I did with Oreos. By the way, this is not unlike any other work of the Holy Spirit in our lives, right? The Spirit can nudge us to do all sorts of different things, whether it be something like raising your hands in worship, or praying for someone, or receiving prayer, or you might get a nudge when you're in line at the grocery store, at the long line in Giant Eagle, to talk to the person behind you about Jesus. And when you have those feelings, we can choose to either submit to them and follow what the Spirit is leading us to do, or we can ignore it and just go about our day doing whatever we were doing. Conviction is similar to all of those things. So it's important to pay attention when the Holy Spirit convicts us. Now, you may be here, you may be like, I've never really experienced that before. Like, how do I know if it's the Spirit that's convicting me? How do I know that the Spirit is speaking or nudging me towards or away from something? If that's you, I'd say the first thing to do is just to simply slow down, right? We are filled with distractions and busyness. We just push through to each just aspect of our day. Slow down and make space in your mind and your heart for the Holy Spirit to speak to you and to move. And the next thing I would say is regularly spend time in the Scriptures. It's so important. Spend time studying the Word, learning about the commands that Jesus gives us, the teachings about how we should live our lives. Spend time studying the Word and putting it into practice. And if you do those two things, you'll start to experience conviction when you start to stray from the path a little bit. Just like we've talked about other parts of this series, it's important to put in the time with the Lord in private so that in public, your life may look more like Jesus, may look more godly. So that's number one. David responds in his spirit with conviction instead of control. The next way we see David respond is through his actions, where he shows release instead of revenge. David's conviction translates into action. He leans into what he's feeling convicted about, and he actually makes a change in his actions. David sharply rebuked his men and did not allow them to attack Saul, and Saul left the cave and went on his way. David restrained from striking Saul, and he prohibited his own men from going after him as well. David had everything that he needed to get revenge on King Saul in this moment. He had the motive. He had the years of being wronged. He had the means, which was his weapon, his sword. And he had the opportunity, Saul alone and vulnerable, and he chose to release all three of those components in that moment. Now, there's all kinds of ways that we like to get revenge on one another when someone does us wrong, right? My wife and I are big fans of the show Friends, and so I think of the episode where Chandler and Joey are going back and forth. It starts off with something small and innocuous where I don't remember who steals the chair, but someone, I believe it was Chandler, sits in the chair that Joey wanted to sit in. And that did not make the other one very happy. And so finally he's like, I need to go and get changed for this thing that I'm doing. And so when he stands up, he takes the cushions of the chair with him because he's like, I'm not letting you sit back in this chair. So they keep going back and forth. Eventually, Joey comes back into the room wearing every single piece of clothing that Chandler owns, because I believe Chandler stole his shirt at one point. It's a lot to keep track of. And he goes, all right, here it is. You steal my shirt, I'm wearing every single thing you own right now, all right? These things can escalate one on top of the other. I don't know. There may be some of us in the room who are petty. I'm sure if you are, there's lots of creative ways that you have gotten back with people over the years, right? Revenge is something that we can deal with, whether in major ways or just little ways, to get under someone else's skin, especially if you have siblings, is the context where that really comes into play. So we think about revenge or getting even with someone. Revenge is like a really strong word. Getting even with somebody. I want you to think about a situation in your life that maybe you've experienced in the past. Maybe it's something you're experiencing right now, and we'll call it your in the cave situation, where you have the ability to tear someone down. And maybe they do deserve it. Maybe they don't deserve it, but the opportunity is before you. Is there a situation where you keep taking jabs to keep evening the score instead of just releasing the situation and that person to the Lord? Revenge, retaliation can often present themselves in easy to obtain ways, but release means choosing to walk away from what appears to be the perfect opportunity and surrendering the situation and trusting the other person to God and allowing Him to sort it out. So we have David responding in his spirit with conviction instead of control. We have him responding in his actions with release instead of revenge. The third way we see David respond is through his words, where he shows humility instead of hostility. Verse 8, it says, "Then David went out of the cave and he called out to Saul, 'My Lord, the king.' When Saul looked behind him, David bowed down with his face to the ground." If you skip down to verse 12, "May the Lord judge between you and me. May the Lord avenge the wrongs you have done to me, but my hand will not touch you. As the old saying goes, from evildoers come evil deeds, so my hand will not touch you. Against whom has this king of Israel come out? Who are you pursuing? A dead dog, a flea? May the Lord be our judge and decide between us. May he consider my cause and uphold it. May he vindicate me by delivering me from your hand." David humbles himself and he bows down before Saul and before the 3,000 who were there to take his life. He uses language when addressing Saul such as Father, my Lord, King. He doesn't call him names, doesn't demean him in any way. Instead, he lowers himself towards his enemy. Sure, he shows Saul evidence of what he had done by cutting off the robe, and but he does it in a way that doesn't build up a case or make it an argument. He simply states the truth. And through his actions and in his words, David shows that he's trusting that God will be the judge of the situation instead of David elevating himself to the role of judge, jury, and executioner. We love having the last word in an argument or in a debate or in a conflict. Our society seems to love having the last word in every debate, argument, or conflict. I mean, I can't turn ESPN on nowadays without it just being like a bunch of people arguing about where LeBron James is going to play next year and who's the best fit, all this stuff. It's like, I remember when I was a kid, this was just highlights. Now everyone's just arguing about something. You know what I mean? If you're under the age of 30, you know who Kendrick Lamar and Drake are, all right? Two big rappers. And a couple years ago, they had this rap beef where they keep dropping diss track after diss track, and it just keeps getting uglier and uglier, and the whole world knows about all their business, right? And whoever comes out on top in these scenarios is often celebrated. Maybe you've been in an argument or a conflict where things just seem to keep escalating and escalating, and no resolution is ever found because each side won't relent until they have the final word. There are times in an argument or in a conflict where you might actually be the one who's right. You might have the moral high ground. You might have the truth on your side. You may have the receipts as to why you're right. You may have the perfect worded argument. But the difference between being right and being righteous is humility. David could have gone off on Saul in this moment, but he chose instead the way of humility. Now, I think there's something in here for the church at large, because if we consider ourselves to be followers of Jesus, we know that Jesus is the way, the truth, and the life. It's only through him that we might be saved, that we might be united with God. There's a lot of people who don't see things that way. And so we have I would say, an obligation as we interact with these people, as we share the gospel with others, as we talk about Jesus, as we share why we believe that Jesus is the way, the truth, and the life, to do it in a way that is humble and doesn't demean someone else for not feeling the same way as us, thinking the same way as us, or having the same life experience as us. As things continually get more digital, it's easier to name call people when we don't actually see them face to face. It's easier to be nasty online when we talk about people who just are different from us in any type of way, but especially it's something that I think Christians tend to struggle with. And so as we do this, as we present ourselves to the world, as we share the gospel, as we talk about Jesus, whether it's online and the things that we post, whether it's with the people that we work with our family members, let's do it in a way that's humble, that's righteous, and that honors God instead of tearing down other people. What do we do when we've been wronged? Just as David did, we're to respond in our spirit with conviction instead of control, in our actions with release instead of revenge, and in our words with humility instead of hostility. Now I want to revisit our friend Ike Brown that we were talking about earlier. Where we left off in his story, he was at his in the cave moment in a Duval County courtroom facing Tekoya Kreiner, the man who killed his son, and he's seeing him for the first time. He was prepared to hate Tekoya, to be filled with rage and contempt towards him. But instead, as he lays eyes on this young man for the very first time, he feels something else. He's overwhelmed with love for him. He says, in the moment, I just wanted to run up and give him a hug. I can't explain why. He's sitting in the courtroom and he questions God, saying, God, why do I not hate this man? I should hate him for what he's done. Aren't I supposed to be angry in this moment? But he just couldn't shake this feeling of love towards this person who had caused this devastating tragedy in his family. And he knew, because Ike Brown is a follower of Jesus, that this feeling of love and compassion was from God. Tekoya was found guilty and sentenced to life in prison, but Ike kept tabs on which prison he was located in. He began to pray for Tekoya every day. And over the course of a couple years, Ike would write a letter to Tekoya. And then as he was about to put it in an envelope and send it, he'd throw it away. And he'd write a letter and throw it away. He did this several times. And finally, 3 years after Tekoya had been incarcerated, Ike Brown mails him a letter. Ike shares that in this letter, he tells him that he prays for him every single day. That he knows that prison is rough because he spent time working in a prison when he was younger. And he tells him, I'm praying that everything can go as well as it possibly can when you're in prison. And that's not all. At the end of the letter, he says, I really miss my son. I really miss Ike Jr. Our family has not been the same since he's been gone. And I'm wondering if you would be willing to take his place and fill in for him until we get to heaven. I understand if you don't want to, but I'd love for you to be a part of our family. So he quickly mails off the letter before he can throw it away. And 3 weeks later, he receives a response from Tekoya. Tekoya tells him that he had been praying while he was in prison for the last couple years. And he would pray, God, if you're real, will the father of Ike Brown reach out to me and tell me that he forgives me? And if you do that, I'll follow you for the rest of my life. So he tells him that because of the mercy that Ike Brown Sr. had shown, that he had given his life to Jesus and he had begun reading his Bible in prison. And he says at the end of his letter, I don't deserve to be your son, but if you would have me, I would love to join your family. And in 2009, Ike Brown Sr. legally adopts Tekoya Kreiner as his son. And to this day, he visits him in prison, he disciples him, and he loves him as his son. And we have a picture of the two embracing in a Florida prison, all right? The whole theme of this message has been what to do when wronged. But I want to flip it a little bit to what to do when wrong. Because if we're honest, the reason why we should, above all, that we should show mercy and grace to other people is because God has shown that to each of us in the form of Jesus. Like Tekoya, we have no right to be a part of the kingdom of God or a part of his family, for all have sinned and fall short of the glory of God. But because God was so rich in mercy and in love, he sent Jesus to die for us so that we may be able to have a place in God's family. We're all broken. We all need forgiveness, grace, and mercy. The Lord has stepped in to provide that for us. And as the Lord provides that to us, may we be the ones that provide that to other people as well.